You know what kills a trader faster than any market crash? It's not bad luck. It's not the manipulation you think you see everywhere. It's not even a lack of capital, though that's what most men will tell themselves when they're licking their wounds in some cheap boarding house, wondering where it all went wrong. It's themselves. I'm Jesse Livermore, and I've made and lost more fortunes than most men will see in 10 lifetimes. $4 million gone, 7 million vanished, 100 million at my peak, and then nothing. I've stood at the top of the world, dictating terms to bankers and railroad magnates, and I've stood in the gutter, borrowing nickels for subway fare. And you want to know the truth that took me decades and countless fortunes to learn? Every single time I blew up, every catastrophic loss, every moment I went from king to beggar, it wasn't the market that destroyed me. It was the man staring back at me in the mirror. You're sitting there right now, reading charts, following your system, telling yourself you're different. You've got discipline. You've got rules. You've read the books, studied the patterns, maybe even made some decent money. And somewhere in the back of your mind, you're wondering why it still feels like you're fighting an uphill battle. Why the big win always seems to slip away. Why you can't seem to break through to that next level. Let me tell you something that'll save you years of pain if you're smart enough to hear it. The market doesn't care about your rules. It doesn't care about your system. It doesn't care about your dreams or your debts or your desperation. The market is going to do what it's going to do. But you care about all those things. And that's exactly why you keep sabotaging yourself. I started as a boy in Payne Weber's bucket shop in Boston, marking prices on the board. 14 years old, and I could read the tape like other boys read dime novels. I saw patterns that the grown men missed. I understood something fundamental. The market speaks, and if you learn its language, it'll tell you exactly what it's going to do next. By 15, I'd made my first $1,000. By 20, I'd been barred from every bucket shop from Boston to New York because I won too consistently. You'd think that kind of early success would set a man up for life, wouldn't you? That's what I thought. I had the gift, the golden touch. I understood the market in a way that seemed almost supernatural. But success early, easy success, is the most dangerous thing that can happen to a young trader. It plants a seed of arrogance so deep in your soul that you don't even know it's there until it strangles you. When I made that first big leap to the real New York Stock Exchange, I got destroyed, absolutely demolished. See, I'd learned to win in bucket shops where execution was instant and the game was pure price action. But the real market? It had delays, commissions, slippage, manipulation. I tried to trade it the same way I'd always traded, and the market taught me a brutal lesson. What works in one environment doesn't necessarily work in another. But here's what really killed me in those early years. I knew I was wrong. Deep down, I knew my approach wasn't working. The losses were piling up. The evidence was screaming at me. But I kept going back to what had worked before. You know why? Because admitting I needed to change meant admitting that my success had been partly luck, partly circumstance. It meant admitting I wasn't the genius I thought I was. That's the first way traders sabotage themselves. They fall in love with their own story. You've got a narrative in your head right now about who you are as a trader. Maybe you're the underdog who's going to prove everyone wrong. Maybe you're the analytical genius who sees what others miss. Maybe you're the disciplined operator who never breaks the rules. These stories feel good. They give you identity. They make you feel special. But the moment you start protecting that story instead of protecting your capital, you're finished. I've watched thousands of traders over the years in the boardrooms, at the ticker, in the speakeasies and gentlemen's clubs where fortunes changed hands on a whisper. And you know what separates the men who make it from the men who blow up? It's not intelligence. Some of the smartest men I knew died broke. It's not even discipline, though that matters. It's the ability to kill your own ego over and over again. Every single day, the market is giving you information. It's telling you whether your analysis is correct or incorrect, whether your timing is right or wrong, whether your position size is appropriate or reckless. But most traders don't hear it because they're too busy listening to their own voice, defending their own decisions, justifying their own losses. I learned this lesson the hardest way possible. After my early failures in New York, I crawled back, studied, adapted, and started building my fortune. By 1906, I was making serious money. I saw the San Francisco earthquake coming well, not the earthquake itself, but the financial implications. I shorted the market beautifully and made $250,000 in a week. I was back. The genius had returned. And then came 1907, and I had the trade of the century set up. I knew, and I mean I knew with every fiber of my being, that the market was going to crash. I could feel it in the tape, see it in the patterns, sense it in the desperate behavior of the big players. I shorted everything in sight, and I was absolutely, perfectly correct. The market crashed so hard they had to close the exchange. J.P. Morgan himself was scrambling to save the financial system. My positions were worth millions, and I was on my way to becoming one of the richest men in America. Then Morgan sent for me, personally. The most powerful banker in the world asked me to cover my shorts because I was making the crash worse. And here's where I sabotaged myself in a way that haunted me for years. I covered, not because I had to, not because my analysis was wrong, but because I wanted to be the man J.P. Morgan called on. I wanted to be important. I wanted to be seen as responsible, as someone who played for the good of the system. I walked away from millions because of ego. Not the ego of pride, but the ego of wanting to be someone I wasn't. I sacrificed the trade because I liked how it felt to be asked. That one decision, born from a moment of emotional weakness disguised as virtue, cost me a fortune. The market would have gone down with or without me. I was just one player among thousands. But I convinced myself I was pivotal, and I paid the price. That's the second way traders sabotage themselves. They trade for reasons that have nothing to do with making money. You're doing this right now, whether you know it or not. Maybe you're holding a losing position because you don't want to admit you were wrong. Maybe you're avoiding a winning trade because it feels too easy, and you've convinced yourself that making money should be hard. Maybe you're overtrading because the action makes you feel alive, gives you a sense of purpose, fills some void in your life that has nothing to do with markets. I've traded for revenge, trying to get back at the market for taking my money, as if the market cared. I've traded for validation, making risky bets to prove I was still the boy wonder who could read the tape. I've traded for excitement because when you've made and lost fortunes, normal life feels impossibly dull. Every single time, I lost. The market doesn't care why you're trading. It only cares about one thing. Are you right or wrong? And even that is almost too generous, because the market doesn't really care about that either. The market just is. It moves based on the collective actions of millions of participants, each with their own fears and dreams and desperation. It's not personal. It's not out to get you. It's not testing you or teaching you lessons. It simply exists, and it will take everything you have if you let it. The psychological warfare you're waging against yourself happens in layers so subtle you don't even recognize them. I remember standing in my office overlooking Wall Street in 1915, master of the universe, convinced I'd finally figured it all out. I had millions in the bank, a system that worked, and the discipline to follow it. I'd learned from my mistakes. I was no longer the impulsive kid who'd blown up in his 20s. I was a professional, and that's exactly when I became most dangerous to myself. See, there's a particular kind of sabotage that only comes after you've achieved some success. It's insidious because it disguises itself as wisdom. You start thinking you understand the market's deeper rhythms. You begin to feel like you've got some special insight that goes beyond your system. You start making exceptions. I'd built my fortune by following simple rules. Let your profits run. Cut your losses quickly. Don't trade against the tape. Wait for the right moment. These weren't just guidelines, they were laws I'd written in my own blood and tears over 15 years of brutal education. But success has a way of making you feel like the rules don't apply to you anymore. Not because you consciously think you're above them, but because you start trusting your intuition more than your system. That's the third way traders sabotage themselves. They trust the wrong thing at the wrong time. After years of winning, I started to feel the market. I'd look at the tape and just know what was coming. Sometimes I was right. Actually, I was right more often than not, which made it so much worse. because each time my intuition proved correct, it reinforced this dangerous belief that I'd transcended mere technical analysis. I'd become something more, a market mystic, a financial artist. The problem with intuition isn't that it's always wrong. The problem is you can't tell the difference between genuine insight and wishful thinking until after the fact. Your brain is constantly generating feelings and hunches, and they all feel equally real. The one that says to buy feels exactly the same as the one that says to sell. The confidence you feel when you're right feels identical to the confidence you feel when you're catastrophically wrong. I proved this to myself in the most expensive way possible during the war years. I was trading cotton, and I had a position that was working beautifully. My system said hold. The tape said hold. Every rational indicator said this trend had further to run, but I got a feeling, this deep, gut-level certainty that I should take my profits. It wasn't based on anything concrete. It was just a sensation, like a whisper in my mind. I ignored my system and closed the position. Cotton immediately dropped, and I felt like a genius. See, this is what separates me from the mechanical traders, I thought. I've got instinct. I've got feel. 3 months later, I got another one of those feelings on a different trade. Same sensation, same certainty. This time, the market didn't cooperate. It kept going against me, and that feeling which had seemed so wise, so trustworthy, cost me a fortune. Here's what I finally understood after losing hundreds of thousands testing this. Those two feelings were identical. My brain couldn't tell them apart. The only difference was the outcome, and I had no way of knowing the outcome in advance. I'd gotten lucky once and convinced myself I had a superpower. That's not trading, that's gambling with extra steps. You're doing the same thing every time you deviate from your plan based on a hunch. Every time you move your stop loss because you've got a good feeling about the position. Every time you size up because you're certain this one is different. Your conviction means nothing. The market has humbled men far smarter and more experienced than either of us. But here's where it gets really twisted. Even when you know this intellectually, even when you've lived through the consequences, there's a part of you that never stops believing you're special, that you're the exception, that this time really is different. I made my greatest fortune in 1929. I saw the crash coming from miles away, positioned myself perfectly, and extracted $100 million from the collapsing market while everyone else was jumping out of windows. $100 million more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. I was 52 years old, wealthy beyond imagination, and finally vindicated after decades of ups and downs. I should have stopped. I should have walked away, managed my fortune conservatively, and lived like a king for the rest of my days. That's what a rational man would have done. But rationality has nothing to do with what happens inside a trader's mind after a massive win. The fourth way traders sabotage themselves is the most paradoxical. Success becomes the setup for destruction. After 1929, I couldn't stop. Not because I needed the money I had more than I could ever use. Not because I loved trading by that point. It had taken everything from me, including 2 marriages. I kept trading because I didn't know who I was if I wasn't trading. My entire identity, my whole sense of self-worth, was wrapped up in being Jesse Livermore, the boy plunger, the man who broke the market. When you tie your identity to trading, every loss becomes personal. Every wrong decision feels like evidence that you're losing yourself. And paradoxically, every win becomes evidence that you need to keep going, that you can't walk away because this is who you are. I started making trades just to prove I still had it. I'd gotten old, see? The young guns were coming up, using new methods, talking about new theories. And there was Jesse Livermore, the legend, the ghost of crashes past. I needed to show myself that I was still relevant, still dangerous, still the best. So I traded, and I lost. Not because my system failed, I'd stopped following my system years ago. I lost because I was trading for all the wrong reasons. I was trading my ego, my fear of irrelevance, my desperate need to be someone important. The losses mounted slowly at first, then faster. I tried to make it back the old way, pressing harder, taking bigger risks. But I was playing a young man's game with an old man's stakes. My timing was off. My judgment was clouded. The man who'd once read the tape like poetry was now just another degenerate gambler chasing his past glory. By the late 1,930 seconds, I was broke again. Not just broke, bankrupt. The 100 million was gone. The houses, the cars, the respect, all of it evaporated like morning dew. And the cruelest part? I'd done it to myself. The market didn't take my money. I gave it away through 1,000 small acts of self-sabotage, each one seeming reasonable at the time, each one defended by my ego, each one a step further from the principles that had made me successful in the first place. You want to know the real tragedy? Even at the end, even after losing everything multiple times, I still couldn't fully see it. I'd write about discipline and patience and following the tape, and I meant every word. But I couldn't apply those principles to my own life consistently because I couldn't get out of my own way. That's the fifth way traders sabotage themselves, and it's the deepest cut of all. They can see the truth clearly and still choose to ignore it. You know what you should do. Right now, reading this, you know exactly what's holding you back. You know which rules you break, which emotional triggers send you off course, which part of your personality is incompatible with profitable trading. You could write it down on a piece of paper in 5 minutes. But knowing and doing are separated by a chasm that most men never cross, because crossing it requires something more painful than losing money. It requires killing the version of yourself that you've grown comfortable being. It requires admitting that your greatest enemy isn't the market or the institutions or the algorithms. It's the voice in your head that sounds like reason but leads to ruin. I spent my last years trying to warn other traders about these traps, writing down everything I'd learned, codifying the principles that worked and the psychological pitfalls that destroyed fortunes. But here's what haunted me in those final days. I could teach the system, but I couldn't teach men how to follow it, because the system isn't the hard part. The hard part is becoming the kind of person who can follow the system when every fiber of your being is screaming at you to do something else. Let me tell you about the moment I finally understood this completely. It was 1,939, and I was sitting in a hotel room, nearly broke again, going through my old trading records. Decades of data, thousands of trades, fortunes made and lost. And I started categorizing every significant loss I'd ever taken. Not by market conditions or technical factors, but by the psychological state I was in when I made the decision. The pattern was so obvious it made me sick. Every catastrophic loss came when I violated one of my own rules. But here's what shattered me. I could trace each violation back to a specific emotional need I was trying to fill. When I was lonely, I overtrade for excitement. When I felt disrespected, I'd take revenge positions. When I was afraid of becoming irrelevant, I'd make spectacular gambles. When I was too comfortable, I'd get careless. When I was in pain, I'd seek the numbing focus of the market. I wasn't trading the market at all. I was trading my feelings, and the market was just the arena where I acted out my psychological dramas. The sixth way traders sabotage themselves is the most fundamental. They use trading to solve problems that trading can't solve. You're doing this right now. Maybe not in the extreme ways I did, but you're doing it. Every trader is. You're trying to prove something to someone. Maybe it's your father who said you'd never amount to anything. Maybe it's the boss who passed you over for promotion. Maybe it's your own younger self who dreamed of wealth and freedom. Maybe it's just the gnawing feeling that you're meant for something more than the ordinary life you're living. Trading becomes the vehicle for those deeper needs. And that's when you're finished, because the market doesn't care about your daddy issues or your need for validation or your existential crisis. The market is a mechanism for transferring money from the emotional to the disciplined. That's all it is. That's all it's ever been. I knew a man once brilliant trader, made millions in the 20s. But he had this need to be seen as sophisticated, as a gentleman of refined taste. So, after each big win, he'd throw lavish parties, buy art he didn't understand, court society women who only loved his money. He wasn't spending his winnings, he was spending his identity as a successful trader on building an identity as an aristocrat. But here's the trap. The more he spent on that image, the more pressure he felt to keep winning to maintain it. The trading stopped being about making good decisions and became about funding a lifestyle he couldn't afford to lose. His position sizing became reckless because he needed big wins to keep up appearances. He started hiding losses from his wife, from his friends, from himself. Within 5 years, he'd lost everything and put a bullet in his head in the coat room of the country club that had just revoked his membership. That man was trying to buy his way out of shame with trading profits. It doesn't work. It never works. Because the hole you're trying to fill isn't financial, it's psychological. And psychological wounds don't heal with money. They just get more expensive. Here's what nobody wants to hear. If you're not happy before you make money trading, you won't be happy after. If you're insecure before you have a big win, you'll be insecure after, just with a nicer car. If you're trading to escape something in your life, the escape will be temporary, and the bill will come due with interest. The seventh way traders sabotage themselves is thinking that the next win will fix what's broken inside them. I chased that illusion for 40 years. I kept thinking that if I could just get back to the top, if I could just make one more fortune, if I could just prove one more time that I was the greatest trader who ever lived, then I'd feel complete. Then I'd feel satisfied. Then I'd feel like I was enough. But standing at the top, looking down at Wall Street from my private office with millions in the bank, I felt exactly the same as I did when I was broke in a boarding house. The same restlessness, the same hunger, the same fundamental dissatisfaction with myself. The money didn't fix it. The success didn't fix it. The fame didn't fix it. Nothing external could fix what was broken internally. And that's the ultimate sabotage, isn't it? Spending your whole life chasing something that can never give you what you're really seeking. Now, I'm not telling you this to make you despair. I'm telling you this because it's the truth. And the truth is the only thing that can set you free. Every single trap I've described, every way you're sabotaging yourself right now has a solution. But the solution isn't what you think it is. You think the solution is better discipline, stronger willpower, more knowledge, a better system. And those things matter, sure, but they're not the core solution. The core solution is something far more radical. You have to stop fighting yourself. Think about what actually happens when you trade. You've got your rational mind that knows the rules, understands probability, respects risk management. And then you've got everything else, your fear, your greed, your ego, your wounds, your dreams, your desperation. Most traders treat this like a war. They try to beat the emotional parts of themselves into submission through sheer force of will. It doesn't work. You can't sustain that battle indefinitely. Eventually, your willpower breaks, and all those repressed emotions come flooding back with a vengeance. That's when you get the spectacular blow-ups, the revenge trading, the all-in gambles that destroy years of careful profit. The real solution, the one that took me a lifetime to glimpse and not long enough to truly implement, is integration. You have to understand that those emotional parts of yourself aren't enemies to be conquered. They're signals to be understood. When you feel the urge to overtrade, that's not weakness, that's information. Something in your life needs excitement or meaning or connection. When you feel the urge to hold a losing position beyond your stop, that's not stupidity, that's information. Something in you can't tolerate being wrong, and you need to figure out why. When you feel the urge to risk everything on one spectacular trade, that's not courage, that's information. Something in you is so desperate for transformation that you'd rather blow up than continue as you are. The eighth and final way traders sabotage themselves is they try to eliminate their humanity instead of working with it. You're never going to become a perfect trading machine. You're never going to fully eliminate fear and greed and ego. And thank God for that, because if you did, you'd lose the very intuition and creativity that makes exceptional trading possible. The goal isn't to become emotionless. The goal is to become aware, to catch yourself in the act of sabotage and choose differently. Here's what that looks like in practice. You're in a position, and it's going against you. Your stop is at 50, and the market is at 52. You feel that familiar sensation, the one that says, just give it a little more room. It's going to turn around. Moving my stop to 45 is just being flexible, adapting to market conditions. The old you doesn't recognize this as sabotage because the story sounds so reasonable. But the aware you, the integrated you, recognizes it immediately. That's not flexibility. That's fear of admitting you were wrong. That's ego protecting itself from a small loss by setting you up for a large one. The aware trader doesn't judge that impulse, doesn't fight it, just sees it clearly and says, I see you, fear. I see you, ego. I understand why you're here. But we're taking the loss at 50 because that's what gives us the highest probability of long-term success. And then, and this is crucial, you take the loss and you don't punish yourself for feeling the temptation. You don't beat yourself up. You don't spiral into shame. You just acknowledge that you're human, you caught yourself before the sabotage happened, and you move on. That's the practice. That's the actual work, not the technical analysis or the chart patterns or the trading strategies. Those are important, but they're not the bottleneck. The bottleneck is you specifically, your ability to see yourself clearly in the moment and choose the harder right over the easier wrong. I failed at this more often than I succeeded. But the times I did succeed, the times I managed to get out of my own way and just trade the market as it was rather than as I needed it to be, those were the times I was truly great. Not because I made the most money, though I often did, but because I was fully present, fully integrated, trading from a place of clarity rather than compulsion. In my final years, I spent a lot of time thinking about what I'd tell my younger self if I could go back, what advice would have saved me from decades of unnecessary suffering. And I realized that any specific technical advice would have been useless because young Jesse wouldn't have listened. He was too arrogant, too hungry, too convinced of his own genius. But if I could have made him understand one thing, it would be this. The market doesn't exist to give you what you want. It doesn't exist to make you rich or prove you're smart or validate your worth as a human being. The market just exists, flowing like a river, completely indifferent to your presence. Your job isn't to conquer the market. It's to understand yourself well enough to stop sabotaging your own success. Every trader has losing trades, that's just probability and the uncertainty of the future. But consistently losing more than probability would suggest, consistently snatching defeat from the jaws of victory, consistently destroying what you've built that's not the market's fault. That's yours. And here's the beautiful, terrifying, liberating truth that I wish I'd embraced decades earlier. If it's your fault, then it's also in your power to change it. Not by trying harder or knowing more or finding a better system, by becoming brutally honest about who you are, what you're really doing when you trade, and what you're actually trying to accomplish. Most men can't do this. They'll spend their whole lives blaming the market, the brokers, the algorithms, the institutions, bad luck, bad timing, anything but themselves. They'll die never knowing that they were their own greatest enemy. They'll go to their graves convinced they were just unlucky, that the game was rigged, that they never got their fair shot. But you have the opportunity to be different, not because you're smarter or more talented or destined for greatness, but because right now, in this moment, you have a choice. You can continue sabotaging yourself unconsciously, or you can bring awareness to the process and start making different decisions. I'm not going to lie to you and say it's easy. It's the hardest work you'll ever do. It's harder than mastering technical analysis or understanding market structure or developing trading systems, because it requires you to face parts of yourself you've been running from your entire life. It requires you to admit that you're not who you pretend to be, that your motives aren't as pure as you claim, that you're just as driven by fear and pain and desperate need as everyone else. But it's also the most liberating work you'll ever do, because once you stop fighting yourself, once you integrate all those warring parts into a coherent whole, once you can trade from a place of genuine clarity rather than unconscious compulsion, that's when you become truly dangerous to the market and safe to yourself. That's when you stop being your own worst enemy and become your own greatest ally. That's when trading stops being psychological warfare and becomes what it always should have been. A game of probabilities played with discipline, patience, and respect for the eternal uncertainty of the future. I learned this too late to save myself. My demons were too deep, my patterns too entrenched, my identity too wrapped up in the cycle of spectacular wins and losses. But you still have time. You still have the chance to be what I never quite managed to become. A trader who succeeds not in spite of being human, but because you've learned to work with your humanity instead of against it. The market will always be there, flowing like that river, indifferent and eternal. The question is, will you step into it whole, aware, and integrated? Or will you continue to sabotage yourself with the same unconscious patterns that have held you back for years? The choice is yours. It always has been. That's the secret they don't want you to know, not because there's some conspiracy to keep you down, but because accepting that truth means accepting full responsibility for your results. No more excuses. No more blaming external factors. Just you and the market and the decisions you make in the space between stimulus and response. Make those decisions count. Trade with awareness. Integrate your shadows. Stop sabotaging yourself. And maybe, just maybe, you'll achieve what I spent a lifetime chasing. Not just wealth, but the quiet satisfaction of knowing you became the trader and the person you were capable of being all along. The tape doesn't lie, but neither does your heart. Listen to both. Respect both. And above all, stop getting in your own way. The market is waiting. The question is, are you finally ready to meet it as you truly are?